The mid-range market has always been a lot more fun to me than the top-end market, and that's mostly because I've spent a lot of time in here, but also because the amount of compromise that you have to do to get the specific thing that you want from your device has always been a fun, if sometimes irritating, experience. The best of the best or the worst of the worst? Pick your poison. Now, I've been daily driving a mid-range phone for the past 2 years now. Yes, this video is about phones for the first time in forever. This is my Oppo Reno8 Z, and I have very strong opinions about this that I wasn't able to make a video about just because phone reviews are very difficult to do properly. And now that I have a new daily driver on my hand, I'm going to talk here as to if upgrading is actually even worth it anymore, considering that tech is entering an age where increases in performance are no longer seen as more important, and quality of life, which is unquantifiable, becomes more and more important to the consumer and manufacturers alike. Is it even worth upgrading anymore now that you can't see the actual difference quantified in front of you? Let's talk about that. Now, I've tried different angles for this video now. Multiple times we shot this because I can't seem to grasp what kind of angle I want to take about the preview of this phone, the Galaxy A35 from Samsung. And I guess one of the things that stood out to me is that under the hood, these two are not so different from each other, despite the fact that they are 2 years apart, right? These two are both mid-range phones in about the same price point now from different manufacturers, and yet their processors and their internal specs are so close together that they may as well be competitors on the same market on the same time rather than, well, separated by 2 years apart, right? So, quick spec rundown here. First, starting with my current daily driver. This thing runs a Snapdragon 695 5G with 2 A78 cores clocked at 2.2 GHz and 6 A55 cores clocked at, I think, around 1.8 to 2 GHz. We'll confirm that on the screen right now. And it's currently running the latest build of Android 14 with security updates for November 2024. It has 8 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, dual SIM, although it can be with one SIM and expandable storage, USB-C, headphone jack, etc. Good stuff. As for this guy right here, this has an Exynos 1380, and that may seem like a completely different chip, but inside the hood, they're using the same core architecture. It has 4 A78 cores clocked at 2.4 GHz and 4 A55 cores clocked at 2 to 2.2 GHz. Just confirm that on the screen. With the same 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. Same microSD expansion capabilities, no headphone jack unfortunately, and USB-C port for data transfer storage. That's all fine and good, but as you may notice, the similarity in architecture of these two processors are actually kind of insane. In performance benchmarks, we have about a 30 to 50% improvement in multi-core performance and a hair's breadth of improvement in single-core performance, likely brought over by that 200 MHz bump in the boost clock of the A78 cores. That should tell you how close these two are despite being 2 years apart. We've seen this pattern in smartphones for the past 5 years now. We've seen improvements in performance become slower and slower and slower. And that leaves me as a reviewer with a difficult choice and that's actually one of the reasons why I don't do smartphone reviews anymore. Switching over from that, let's talk about other facets of these phones, starting with cameras. This thing was actually quite a bit of a disappointment for me in terms of camera-wise. Not the photos, mind you. This thing takes excellent photos. It has a 64 megapixel main sensor, This one is for depth sensing and this one is for micro. So it's a triple sensor camera, although it's not really a triple lens camera because the only usable one here is the 64 megapixel one. And that 64 megapixel does take great photos, but suffers from software difficulties and very terrible video capabilities. This thing only does 1080p 30 and it is very, very bad. Which is actually where this thing shines, because while on paper the specs of this thing aren't actually that much of an upgrade. This is a 50 megapixel sensor, so it's a little bit down from this one in terms of the main sensor capability, at least megapixel wise. There's a discussion to be made about how much that matters, but anyways, 50 megapixel for the main sensor. The difference is that these three cameras are all very much usable in their own right. One is an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor and the other is a 5 megapixel macro sensor. And those two sensors are much more usable compared to the other sensors of this guy, because not only do they take very good photos on each of those sensors, they also take a hell of a lot of a better video. And that's mostly due to software optimizations on the video side and on the exposure side as well. Sometimes post-processing does give the Reno8 Z an edge, like in some very niche cases where the sharpness matters most and their dynamic range optimization in software actually does a better job of balancing out the highlights with the shadows. But in most instances, the softer but better composed and software enhanced photos of the Samsung, combined with its actually faster processing of the photos, gives it an edge in the majority of cases. And combined with a much better video quality, basically makes it a much bigger upgrade compared to my Reno8 Z. So what's the point of this video then? I've showed two different sides to this. The performance, which hasn't really changed much, and the cameras, which have changed dramatically. What's the point of making this then? Is it just to show that the mid-range market is a whack? Well, sort of yes, but also to show what people are focusing on more now other than performance, and one of the reasons why phone reviews are very difficult to make. One of the key things that is an upgrade from the Reno8 Z in this phone is how smooth it feels. And not just because of the processing, mind you, but mostly because of the interface and the screen. This thing has actually lower pixel density screen than this one, but they are both AMOLED, and crucially, this thing has not just a brighter display, but also a higher refresh rate display. This thing can go up to 120 Hz, which is freaking awesome, right? Like, this is some of the most smooth Android experiences that I've ever had, and this is with a mid-range device, not a flagship one. The smoothness of the UI, and especially in games, cannot be understated, to the point where you probably wouldn't have guessed that these two are very comparable performance-wise, right? The GPU is another matter to this. The GPU performance is much faster on the Exynos than it is on the Snapdragon, but in any case, the difference is close enough on the mobile scale that it's not that makes the difference. It's the responsiveness, and that's one of the things that people are looking for right now. Not performance, but quality of life. Things that you cannot quantify properly, right? These are qualitative variables, and that makes it so much more difficult to evaluate phones because we all have differing opinions, and all of those opinions, ironically enough, are correct and valid. So what happens now going forward? Well, I do hope to review this phone in much more depth at some point. This is just sort of an introductory thing, I guess, and just to whinge about how difficult it is right now to decide to upgrade and what the priorities of consumers are right now, especially in the mid-range. The race for performance has stalled, and right now people are looking for better experiences, better software experience, better responsiveness, better photos, right? Differing priorities than honestly what us as PC users are much more concerned about. So we'll see how this goes, but these two will be living with my pocket for the next few months or so, and hopefully we can get a review out of them. So yeah, Happy New Year, everyone.